y'all to take a survey here so I can kind of get an idea as to what level of expertise we have, and perhaps whether you've ever tried starting seeds indoors. So would you bring that up, please? So go ahead and click on that, and we'll check on it in a moment. All right, let's go ahead and see our results. All right, so looks like we're pretty much have a wide range, but a lot of very experienced gardeners as well. So this presentation hopefully will be aimed at everybody. I'll point out the things perhaps that beginners might want to wait until they try that. All right. So it's always nice if you're going to be growing and to have references. So here in the Bay Area, this is not going to help you if you're not in the Bay Area. There's a nice book called Golden Gate Gardening, and one of the things that I really like about it is it tells you when to plant what. It'll also tell you, it's also for Livermore and those areas, and it will give you information about, what you can plant, what will do well for you, hopefully. So seeds are alive. There's three parts to them. There's the outer shell, there's the food, and then there's the embryo. And what we want to do is give them the correct conditions to germinate. So we want, usually that means warmth and moisture. So the question might be, why grow from seed? Because you can always go to the nursery and purchase 6-packs of plants. There's many plants no other way, especially root crops. You'll find that to be the case for carrots, radishes, turnips are tough. So those you have to direct seed if you really want to get any kind of a successful growth. Another thing is if you're growing things that you're growing in volume, like corn, beans, and like I said before, root crops, if you want beets, you want a lot of those, that means that you're going to be better off trying to plant them from seeds than to, if you're growing 40 corn plants, that's a lot of 6-packs. There are a lot of plants that are very easy to grow because they have large seeds. Corn, beans, squash, those are good examples. And there are also plants that do not transplant well. The things in the squash family, pumpkins, winter squash, summer squash, zucchini, cucumbers, they do not transplant well. You can grow them, but those quite often are grown direct seeded because they just don't grow well. And it's so that when you purchase them, a lot of times you will see them at the gardening nursery in 4-inch packs, and they're really large. They look like they're beautiful of squash, zucchini, but in reality, those are not going to transplant well. So you're better off growing them from seed. And of course, it's much cheaper. You can buy 4 years worth of tomatoes for $4 and grow all the tomatoes you want unless you have a really large garden. There's a much bigger variety possible to you if you grow from seed. If you look at a seed catalog, there are just so many more varieties than they can possibly stock in a nursery. And if you're like me, it's fun. It's fun to take a little bitty seed and watch it grow up in a plant, put it out in your garden, and turns into food, I may be crazier than most, though. So I do buy 6-packs, things that are hard to germinate. Parsley is hard to germinate. Perennials, if I only need a few plants or I need something to, that I haven't planned ahead. But in general, I grow almost everything from seed. when we talk about seeds, we wonder about what's open pollinated hybrid. We worry about GMOs. We worry about organic versus inorganic. Open pollinated just means that it comes true from seed. If you collect the seed from a plant that's open pollinated and it's self-pollinated, you'll get the same plant. Hybrids, on the other hand, usually F1 hybrids have two parents. If you don't have those two parents, if you just harvest the seed from the plant, you will not get the same plant. Most seeds, if not all seeds that you can purchase for the home garden are not GMOs. GMOs are mainly corn, soybeans, or for commercial crops. So generally, you don't have to worry about that. Organic versus inorganic, that's just how they're grown, the plants are grown. So if you want to support organic gardening, that's a reason to buy organic seeds. However, the seeds themselves are not different at all. There is generally cool season and warm season plants. Now, if you look in the chat box, you're going to see this handout. Now, this is for the Bay Area, and it's specifically for places like Oakland, Berkeley, even Hayward, although in Castro Valley, those kind of places. If you don't live in that area, still cool season, warm season herbs, all of those are correct. It's just when to plant is going to be different if you live in an area that has, hard frost. For those of us who live here, you can even see when to plant is on the right column. And then cool season plants here in the Bay Area are generally planted in the spring and the fall. Here in the Bay Area, I normally plant my cool season plants February, early March. Warm season here, of course, here in Oakland, warm season is not real hot. I usually plant April 15th through June 1st. So I think you can download that if you would like, and it also tells you about herbs. So cool season, usually you have to have a temperature of at least 40 degrees, and warm season, 65 degrees a day, 50 degrees a night. A lot of times cool season are planted before your last frost. Here in Oakland, our last frost was, I don't even remember when it was. Sometimes it gets to 32 degrees for an hour or two, but we have not had a hard frost in a long time. So planting direct seeding, or that's planting outdoors directly into your garden. I'm of course not going to go into how you prepare your garden, which is very important, and how much sun you need, all of those things. That's another talk. But can I have so outdoors, root crops, large seeds, and easy seeds for my beginners. Those are where you can start, because they're very easy to plant. Could I have my first slide? Come down to here we go. So, oh, well, I forgot that. Large seeds like these beans are easier to plant than say carrots, which you'll see are on the right side. So if you're just starting out and you're a little worried about direct seeding, go with your big seeds first. Plant your beans, carrot, and leave. You can try the carrots. I'm going to tell you how to plant it. It's really not too bad, but that's a good place to start. Be sure that you fertilize the soil before you're planting. It's good to start with moist soil before you plant anything. There are a lot of different approaches to planting outdoors. I've tried quite a few of them, actually. There's the standard approach, traditional approach, is to plant single long rows and have them separated by, the distance depends on what you're planting. There's also something called the deep bed method, which is what I did for years, and I'm doing a variation on that now. And that is where you dig down 2 feet, loosen the soil, never walk on the soil, and you plant everything much closer together. So there's also, it's called wide row gardening. I'm doing a combination of single rows and wide row gardening these days. I have found that single rows quite often you're going to get more, your harvest is going to be larger than it will be if you plant everything close together. So I'm doing a kind of a combination. I plant in a wide row, which means I plant my carrots and beets, things of that nature, about a rake width apart. Could I have my next slide, please? This is wide row carrots that I have planted. These are baby carrots. So they're only about an inch apart, a thinned about an inch apart. And you can see there's a lot of room on both sides. So there still is room, hopefully, for the roots to expand, but I can get a lot more plants in the same area. Let's see, could I have the next slide? These are wide row beets. These were planted, can't see where they're planted. So I don't know if you can, these were planted, I believe, they were planted October 1st, and this photo was taken January 1st. So you can see how big they've gotten. They grow a lot slower in the winter, but they're still doing well. You can also plant in containers outside, directly into containers. Could I have the next slide, please? So the container, the great thing about a container, if you have really heavy soil, clay soil like we do here, and you can grow your root crops and you can control exactly what kind of soil it is. These are beets. They haven't been thinned yet, and you can see how thickly they are. So then I will thin these down to probably 3 inches apart. But I've filled the entire container. It's about a same thing, rake width apart. So when you want to know how far apart things should be, or how deep they're planted, or information of that nature, a great place to look is on the back of the seed bag. Could I have the next slide, please? So you see here that this one will let you know this is a tomato, and they say not recommended for sowing outside. So that's actually a good thing to know. It is possible, depending on where you live. If you live where it's a nice hot summer and it goes from June all the way through August, September, you can start them outside and direct seed them. But generally, what we want to do is start those indoors, so we're sure that we'll be able to get a nice harvest. And I'll talk about that a little later. So for root crops, which take very little, the seed depth is same as it is on this package, 1/4 of an inch. You can broadcast your seeds. So you can broadcast your seeds. You want to try and make sure they're not too thick. Sometimes people will mix like carrots with sand. I just try to broadcast them, and then sometimes I'll just use a rake to kind of rake, and that is enough to bury enough of the seeds that they'll come up, and I'll have plenty, and then I won't have too much trouble thinning. Normally what I like to do is I like to take a potting mix that doesn't have soil in it, and sprinkle that over the top, because that gives the seeds a very easy, soft medium that they can push through. But that's mainly because I have kind of a clay soil. So if I cover it with that soil, even though I've been working it since 1992, even with that, sometimes it's hard for the seeds to come up. Those of you who have beautiful loam or sand, that's probably not necessary. The back of the seed pack, you'll also notice it'll tell you how far apart once they're growing, or if you're adding transplants. And once again, I'll talk about a little more about that later. They'll tell you the distance, the depth that you want to plant it, and the distance apart. That's things that are, you know, like bush beans or even pole beans. Just follow those directions and make sure that you keep everything moist after you've planted them. And you should have good success. For the squashes that I talked about that are hard to transplant, those are quite often direct seeded. People also, broccoli, cauliflower, are also, what normally is done with those is you dig a little hole, because things like winter squash are far apart. You dig a nice hole, fill that with your compost and fertilizer, plant directly into that hill. Okay. So there are problems with growing outside. The problems here in the Bay Area, little teeny seedlings are easily killed. They're eaten by snails, slugs, birds, cats come by and, you know, just dig in the soil and take out half your crop. Could I see the next slide, please? For some reason here in my garden, I'm having a lot of trouble with birds. Don't know if you can see it, but you can see the hoops. This is spread with bird netting over my beets. And I'm having to do that with almost everything. They're even eating cauliflower and broccoli, peas. The other thing I have trouble with is squirrels after my corn. So I have to put a cage around the corn also. So that's kind of a problem. If you have a larger plant, then it's much harder for them to do enough damage. And once they get up and growing, something like a tomato, then you no longer have problems with any of those. Even though the birds might eat some of it, they can't do enough damage to really slow it down. The distance apart is different depending on what you're growing. Like I say, it's on the seed package. You can also just go on the internet. You can also, there's tons of great books about it. You can take them out of the library or purchase them. I'm always reading new books. Everybody's got a new method. It's always fun at least to read them. So now indoors, can I see the polling again? As I recall, it was about 50% had and 50% around that had not ever grown indoors. If you're a real beginner, this is your first year. Yeah, 60-40. Thank you. If you're a real beginner, I would suggest that for the first couple of years, buy your stuff from the nursery, your tomatoes, big plants, and experiment with direct seeding outside for your root crops and your corn, beans, things of that nature. Once you feel comfortable with that, then you might then go ahead and start growing indoors. Now, if you're real confident in your ability, I'd say go for it. But I have found that it's better to succeed early. I wouldn't want you to quit gardening. So indoors, the reason you grow indoors is you need a head start, right? Your long season crops, summer crops, tomatoes, peppers, cauliflower, and broccoli, and others need, especially here in the Bay Area, we don't have a hot summer, you need to give them a head start. And so you also can protect your seedlings, like I was talking about before. So even lettuce and pole beans, peas, corn, all of that, I start indoors just to be sure that, well, mostly I start indoors, just to be sure that I'll have success and my crop won't be wiped out, which is frustrating at best. Major points, cleanliness. So because of fungal disease, the most important one is that called damping off, where your little seedlings just die, they just rot at the very bottom where they contact the water. So you want to be sure that you sterilize, that you have clean, containers that you start your seeds in. You can sterilize them in a 10% bleach solution. I have found that, well, I'll get into that in a minute. Let's see. Also, what kind of pots, labels, soil mix, that's all important for indoors. Very important is the temperature that you keep them at, or when you're trying to get them to germinate, the light that you give them. Some for germination, certainly as soon as they germinate. Water, extremely important. Little bitty plants die immediately if they dry out. And then, of course, once they do germinate, how do you keep them going until you're ready to transplant them in the garden? So for pots, I use all kinds of pots, but you can use, here's a 6-pack. You know, you bought your plants in it. Here's the small one. And then, of course, they also these days come in nice big 6-packs of like this nature. Those are great for starting your plants, especially if you don't have too many. If you have a lot of, if you want to grow a lot of pots, a lot of plants, you can put them in you can sow the seeds in something like this. I like this. Notice the holes in the bottom. I had to drill those. Could I have the next slide, please? Are you there, Susan? Next slide. Great. So this is this fits into a flat. This holds, I believe, 50 plants. So this is great. What you see in this one, I'm growing my flowers. I've got lobelia and impatiens in this, and I need a lot of those just because they're annuals generally, and I have lots of pots that I like to put them in, and then of course in the front yard, so the neighbors are impressed with my beautiful flowers. Next, could I have the next slide, please? So this is these are lettuce plants growing in this little thing here. And so I was thinking that there would be a lot more than you're seeing, just for those of you who think, oh, gardening, you just get so good at it, you never have any kind of trouble. I got okay germination on the left side and bad germination on the right side, but fortunately, I don't need too many lettuce plants at once. So that's what you can do. This is I use this if I'm trying to start quite a few plants. And let's see, could I have the next slide, please? So these are tomatoes that I'm growing now. They're in a 6-pack. They're in that nice big 6-pack. This one here. And you can direct seed. What I quite often do, because I don't need too many tomatoes, is I direct seed into the 6-pack, and then when I'll put 2 or 3 seeds in each one, and then I'll thin it out to the best one and just let them keep growing. Let's see. Now, I also grow my squash, which does not transplant well. For some reason, I have Helen Wheeler on my screen, is it? There we go. And what I do is I grow them in paper pots. This one, this is like an origami paper pot. I just went to YouTube and put in seedlings. Let me see, what exactly did I say? I just put in, paper pots for seedlings, and it shows you there's quite a few of them, how to fold them. You can also buy, this is something they sell to create paper pots. However, the pots are kind of teeny. They're little bitty things. Most commonly, this is what I make. What this is I just wrapped it around a can of corn. Folded, a little longer at the bottom, folded it together, and taped it. And so I'll plant my winter squash, summer squash in this. And what you want to do is before they get very big, once they've got maybe 4 true leaves, go ahead and plant them. So you kind of have to know how to time that. Be sure you label everything. It's not a bad idea to not only label what they are. If you're growing more than one kind of tomato, they tend to all kind of look the same. So what I like to use, I use plastic, you can use wood, and I write on it in pencil. So I can just erase it, use it again next year. There's all different kinds. This one came with one of my pots. And you can even use, this is a blind, a Venetian blind that my cat was kind enough to break off. It makes a great label as well. Now, seed starting mixes, this is really important. Could I have the next slide, please? So there it is. You'll notice this is the back of the, I recommend buying a commercial seed starting mix. And what you really want to look for is sphagnum peat moss. You'll know this mix is 70 to 80%. And then it's perlite, which is just something that makes it drain easily in a wetting solution. Not really sure why they have that in there. Peat moss really holds a lot of moisture. The reason you want to do that is because it's resistant to damping off. I don't have trouble with damping off because I use this. And so I have not, I do not sterilize my pots generally. And I find that I don't have a problem. But I highly recommend that you find some kind of commercial product and make sure that it does have sphagnum peat moss. Some of them have fertilizer, which is fine, but just know if they do, that's something that you need to know, because then you don't need to add fertilizer later. I just saw a question which I didn't say. What I do, I usually don't, you can just plant this directly in the ground, but it also peels off real easily and leaves the, if you've got it damp, leaves a nice soil ball, and you just plant that soil directly into the ground. Either way, the newspaper, you know, disintegrates really rather quickly. The only trouble is that newspapers are disappearing. All right, so the other thing, most of your summer plants, tomatoes and squash and beans, all of those things, they like to be at about 80 degrees to germinate. And so you generally look to find a spot that you've got warmth. Some people, they recommend the top of your hot water heater or refrigerator. What I do is I use a heating mat. This is what the heating mat looks like. It plugs in, and this will keep it at 80 degrees. Okay. And actually, you can get a thermostat if you want to keep it at a different temperature, but that will do a great job of germinating those summer plants that love to have heat. As soon as the plants germinate, though, you want to turn that off because they grow better at a lower temperature. Cool season plants, on the other hand, normally they like 60 to 70 degrees, which is what we normally keep our houses at, maybe. That's normally what we'll keep our house at anyway. And so you can just set them out and make sure for the next thing is that they get enough light. So once the plants germinate, and some plants, as you'll see from the seed packages, need light to germinate. I found mostly that's flowers. Once the plants are up, you need to give them sufficient light that they don't get real leggy and weak. So all of our vegetables generally like full sun. Some of the leafy ones if you live in a climate where you have a really hot sun, if you're out in Livermore, then they are not as crazy about full sun. But here in Oakland, you can have full sun for any of your vegetables. So you need to give them a nice strong light. What I do is, what I've been doing forever, also if you put them in a south-facing window, that's where there's a lot of nice sun, you'll have to turn them because they're going to lean towards the light. You're also not going to be able to put them in a plastic bag or to use any kind of a plastic cover on them because they'll get too hot. What I use is, I grow mine under fluorescent lights, or actually now, yeah, they're still fluorescent. You can get a very inexpensive, shop light that has 2 tubes and grow it. Oh, is that? So we're at a half an hour. I wonder what that was. So if you have questions for me, you might want to put them in the chat at this time. Let's see. So 2 bulbs, and you heat them just at 1-2 inches above your seedling, and you turn the timer. It's on for 14 to 16 hours. So you have to have a timer, and you're also going to need the shop light, of course. Could I have the next slide, please? So this is my setup. Remember, I'm kind of a crazy, and I like toys, typical guy. This is my 2-tube fixture with G5 lights. See how close they are to the transplants? And could I have the next slide, please? This is, I have a 3-tier that I purchased, and so I can grow quite a few of them. And you can see, here's what I have growing. Would you back up one for me, Susan? You can't see the, never mind. So those work really well. Let's see, I just saw a question here. I had it in my notes, but I didn't say it. I don't recommend egg cartons or peat pots as starting seeds. Egg cartons don't have enough soil. There's not very many plants that are going to grow well with that little soil. And I've noticed peat pods, they say you can plant them right in the garden. I planted them right in the ground. And when I pulled stuff up at the end of the season, the peat pot was still there. So I don't recommend either one of those. You could use pellets, paper pots. I think those you'll find will work quite a bit better. You can find somebody who still reads the newspaper. So once they're up, you also want to fertilize your seedlings. What you're going to use is a nice weak solution. You don't really want to use a 10-10-10 kind of fertilizer. Something that's more in the, 3-1-1 or 4-2-2 or some, your fish emulsion, those kinds of things. If you're an organic gardener like myself, you can find organic liquid fertilizers that work just fine for this. I don't fertilize a lot, but I do say every second, every third watering or so. And they're going to need that. And that's, if you have fertilizer in the mix, then you should not need to do that. Water is extremely important. First, you want to make sure that your seedling mix before you plant in it is nice and moist. And then once things are planted, you can either bottom water. Once again, this actually came without the holes. So you could bottom water. What that means is that you put water in this, put your 6-pack or your whatever in it, and let it fill, water your seedlings. Then you have to dump it out because you don't want them to be to be waterlogged. I'm way too lazy to do that. So what I use is a mister. So I mist nice and heavily after I planted, and once I've done that, then what I'll do is, as you can see, this also, cute little device here, comes with a plastic top. So you either want to put them in a plastic bag, Make sure you maybe put little pencils or something, labels, so that the bag doesn't sit on the seedlings. Of course, the seedlings haven't come up yet, so that's probably not a problem. Let's see, I think. Yeah, can I have the next slide, please? One more, there it is. So you see, this is also, this is nice. It fits right over a flat. If you have a lot of plants to grow. This is just for a demonstration. You have to remove that cover as soon as your seedlings are up and growing. You want to take that cover off because now there's too much humidity. So, but this is just to let you see what you can do. All right, when to plant. So what you want to do is you find your last frost date and you count back from that or forward. The frost date is what everybody uses to determine when to plant in your area. Like I said, in my area, don't really have frost. So I use April 15th for my warm, and April 15th to May 1st. And then I use February, maybe 15th is probably better, for my cool season. And I count back from that. So when you look at, a lot of times when you look at the seed package, or like I said, on the internet, or there's a ton of places to find out how long. So peppers need 6 to 8 weeks. So I count back 6 to 8 weeks, that's when I plant. Pumpkins are only 3 to 4 weeks, probably 3, because remember, they don't transplant well. So I plant them 3 weeks before I'm going to put them in the ground in my paper pot. The tomatoes are 6 to 10 weeks. So I plant them fairly early. I like them to get nice and big before I plant them because I love tomatoes, don't we all? And we don't have a long season here. So can I have the next slide, please? So once again, you'll notice that a lot of the information you need is here on this seed package. Even this says 6 to 8 weeks, like I said, it's the tomato. Talks about things you can do if you're going to plant it early. Fertilizing tips, how even the specs on the seed. So like I say, that's a good, not all seed packages have this much information, but generally there's great information there and most of the information that you'll need. So you can transplant, continue to transplant up. So what I've done, let's see. I have the next slide. I don't remember if I put that in here or not. Yeah, so this is a good summary. These tomato plants here, this is actually, I planted them in a smaller 6-black, and now I've transplanted them up to a larger one. These are tomatoes I'm just going to experiment with. They're supposed to grow in a 6 to 8 inch pot and do very well. So I'm really growing these, so I'm hoping they'll get a lot of tomatoes in a little bitty pot. I'll give them to my non-gardening friends, and they can put them on their patio in the sun and have tomatoes. So they're little teeny plants. I have also got my regular tomato. This is a Stupiche, which does very well in cool weather. And so you get nice early tomatoes. And so I'm at this size already, even though this one I have an unheated greenhouse, so I'll plant it out in about March 15th.
Call from Daryl Daniels.
So remember the lettuce that I showed you and that I said didn't do that well? I didn't come up that well. Well, here's what it looks like now. That was like the end of December. And now look at it. It's ready to plant actually outside. I'm going to, before you transplant, you have to get your plants used to being outside. They've been in this wonderful environment with a beautiful light, nice and warm. So now suddenly I'm going to put them outside in 40-degree nights. So I'll put them outside for a day and for all day, and then bring them in the next day. I'll leave them out a little longer, and then I'll leave them overnight, but in a shaded area. Then I'll move them to the sunny area. And once they have reached that area, then I'll plant them directly into the yard. So it's always a good idea to do that with any of the plants that you're going to plant outside. You always want to kind of get them ready to go. So that puts me at the end of my talk. Can we have that, maybe have that summary up again, Susan? I think we want, yeah, here we go. So these are the things that I talked about. So I'm ready to answer questions. "14 to 16 hours is what I put it on. Well, like I said, the most important thing that I find is to use the right seedling mix. You're going to sterilize, use a 10% bleach solution, and then just let your containers soak in that for a few minutes, and then rinse them off, let them dry, and they should be ready to go. Of course, you also have to clean any dirt or anything that's in them.
So there are a lot of questions in the chat box, and so I've had to scroll to the beginning to find them all. But somebody wants to know, how many seeds did you put, how many beet seeds did you put in that size container?
Gee, well, I broadcast them, so I sprinkle them. Okay. So it's maybe a quarter of a. I'm fairly liberal because I have a pretty small area, so thinning is not too crazy. So okay, I just broadcast it, trying to make it about an inch apart in that container.
And somebody would like you to explain the thinning process again, please.
Yeah, I did not talk about that much, did I? So seeds are inexpensive, I think. So I always, for instance, corn, I always plant 4 corn seeds in each hole because for some reason they don't seem to come up well. There's even an old saying about that. But so once they come up, then I let them grow to be about, for corn, maybe an inch tall. And then I just take a pair of scissors and snip off the ones that I don't want. So I just have one per hole. When it comes to things like carrots can be really a pain to thin because it's hard to broadcast them thinly enough. I usually pull them out and I'm going to thin them, either carrots I'm growing or baby carrots, so an inch apart is fine. For regular carrots, now I'm going to thin to 2 to 3 inches approximately. So you just, when you look at, once again, your seed package or the information as to how far apart they should be, and that's how far, usually how far they should be apart in a row is also how far they should be apart in a wide row or in a deep bed. There's also square foot gardening. He's real specific about that. So then you just go out and once they've got their true leaves, what happens in a seedling is when it first comes up, it has leaves that are not going to be the same as the true leaves. So once those are replaced by true leaves, you can start to think about thinning. For things like carrots, which are pretty small when they come up, I let them get to be, once again, half an inch tall.
Okay, there's a question, David, about transplanting from smaller packs to larger ones. And they're not specific, they just kind of want to know the timing, I'm guessing.
Well, what you want to do is once the plant, if I were not going to put these guys in the yard, in the ground, they are ready to transplant. You can see you don't want them to get root bound, right? But you don't want to transplant them when they're too small because then they hold too much water and the roots rot. So when they get to kind of a nice size, sometimes you can pop them out, take a look at the root ball and make sure, see how many roots are in it. But all you have to do is take them out, put them in a larger container and fill around it with potting soil. I didn't talk too much about potting soil. I use a commercial potting soil as well.
Do you add fertilizer to the potting soil, David?
Pardon me?
Do you add fertilizer to the potting soil?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Usually what I do is fertilize. I do that for my containers outside usually, but normally for my 6-packs that I'm transplanting into, I'll feed them with a liquid fertilizer. Like I said, every third.
Somebody's asking about your indoor light source. Sorry.
Pardon me?
Somebody wants a reference for your indoor light source, and unfortunately, we don't make really references to commercial products. But you can go on any of them, Google or Amazon, and look them up and see what you think. David, did you want to add to that? Yeah. Okay.
No. Yeah, there's actually, if you go to any commercial gardening, where you get catalogs, many of them have light gardens like I do. I've got more than the ones you saw, but I grow orchids under light also.
Somebody's asking, do you have a suggestion for non-plastic coverings?
Non-plastic covering?
Non-plastic.
Need something transparent. So what's not transparent? That you actually don't have to have a covering. If you mist it every day, you don't have to cover it. I don't know though what's clear that's not plastic. Glass, I guess. Yeah, you could use glass.
And when do you put the plastic on? And how long do you leave it on for?
As soon as you plant the seedlings and you've misted them, they're nice and damp, you put the cover on it and you leave it on until they germinate. That keeps it moist and humid so you don't have to water it anymore. Like I said, though, if you want, I grow it quite often, especially for something that's got a fairly large seed, like a bean, and I'm going to get them started. I will not put a cover on them. Just check them I check it, you're going to have to, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to check your stuff every day too, just to make sure that it doesn't dry out. And once you see it germinate, you can take the tops off. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but you can't just come down once a week and see all your dead plants. And I've done that too.
Somebody's asking about growing loofah. Is that like growing cucumber?
Growing what?
Loofah.
Loofah? I believe I grew that once upon a time when I had sun. I believe that's a squash too. I would start that. You can either start that outside, realize that it's a kind of a long vine, and or you could start it in your paper pots. Either way, it should germinate and take off pretty quickly. That's one of those 2-week things if you do it inside.
Okay. Somebody's asking about what is a stupus tomato?
The what?
A stupus, S-T-U-P-I-C-E tomato.
For some reason you're cutting out.
I don't know why.
I don't know what kind of.
It's spelled S-T-U-P-I-C-E.
I'm sorry. Why don't you put it on the screen?
I'm sorry, David, what?
Say that again. If you're cutting out, you were cutting out there. You sounded okay. Try it again.
Is that better? Okay, it's S-T-U-P-I-C-E tomato.
Oh, stupid. This one here. That's right. S-T-U-P-I-C-E.
Yes.
An heirloom from the Czechoslovakia, which is now Czech Republic.
Now, somebody's asking about the frost dates and when to begin and when to plant.
Well, the important thing is, what is your first frost date? What is your last frost date? Once you have those two, you can find information online or on the seed packs or in the books about how long before or after that date you should plant. And it'll tell you, and if it's a transplant, then you can count back from that date and know when to start. So it'll say 2 weeks before your last frost date, you can plant your beets. 2 weeks after your first frost date, you can plant your tomatoes. So that means your transplant is 2 weeks after if it's a tomato. So you want to go 6 weeks before that frost date. And there's an agricultural websites that will tell you the frost date for your area.
Okay, how do you deal with gnats when you're starting seeds?
Gnats?
Yep.
Normally, I don't have any trouble. I've never had trouble with gnats with starting seeds. I've had trouble with gnats in houseplants. If you use a sterilized soil, it shouldn't be a problem because they don't have time to get going before the seeds are up and gone. So, or I don't know would be another answer.
Now there's another question about what is the organic wetting agent listed on the seed starter meant for?
I'm with you. I don't know.
Okay.
Because sphagnum moss, it holds water beautifully. So apparently it's necessary for some kind of wetting. But I'm with you. I'm not real sure what that is. I'll bet there's not much of it in there if it's 80% moss. And then it has pearl.
One of our master gardeners is suggesting that too many gnats are due to too much water in the soil. The soil is too wet.
Okay. Yeah, be careful. You don't want, if you keep it too wet, the roots will rot also. The plant will die.
There's a couple of questions about the frost dates, based on your region where you live, whether you're on this side of, whether you're on the west side or the east side of the county. So where would you suggest people look for those dates for their county?
Well, there's just Google frost dates for my area. And here in the Bay Area, our weather, there's a big difference between weather in San Leandro and Oakland and Berkeley and Hayward, and then of course, if you go over to Livermore, it's quite a bit different. So you need to find something further specific, but you should be able to easily find that on the internet. The frost date for Oakland, like I said, pretty much doesn't exist. So I've just chosen February 15th to plant my cool season in April. I found that those dates generally work well.
Somebody's asking if you can use compost tea as a substitute for liquid fertilizer.
I believe so, yes. Compost tea, that I'd say give it a try and see how it does. When I had my worm garden, I used to use the liquid that was used. It was a good fertilizer, so I would give it a try. I suspect that it will do well.
You can also, a couple other gnat questions, and let me refer you to the UC IPM website. I put it earlier in the chat box. So it's ipm.ucanr.edu, and I'll put it in again. It will answer your pest questions.
Pardon me?
Are there any more questions or?
I saw a bunch of questions that I didn't answer. Somebody asked about compost.
Oh, tips for slug control.
Well, I find that people don't like my tips for slug control. Because we have a real problem here with snails and slugs. And I have found the absolute best way is to go out at night or early in the morning with a flashlight and hand pick them. I put them in a little plastic bag and put them in the garbage so that when they reach the garbage dump, they'll be free and have a wonderful place to eat. Now, the other thing is, I think we can recommend this. It's called Slugo. It's an organic, it's a iron phosphate. There's other names for it. Slugo is just one of the brand names, but it's iron phosphate, and if you put that out at the same time I find that it's somewhat effective. If you don't, if you wait until you see the slug damage, the slugs have figured out that your plant tastes a lot better than Slugo. But that I found to be somewhat effective if you put it out at the same time you put your transplants or seeds out. Generally, though, if I'm having damage, I just get the flashlight and go out and pick them. The snails are not too bad, but the slugs are a little kind of a drag because they get all slimy.
How do you sterilize your soil, David?
I buy sterilized soil. I don't sterilize it. You can sterilize it in the oven, but I don't think my wife would appreciate it.
How to repel?
Go ahead.
Sorry. There's a couple of other questions now about, and they really fall into the category of pests. And I'm going to again refer you to the IPM website I posted, because this is really more about growing things, not so much pests. People are asking about rodents and cabbage worms, and anyway.
Yeah, that's a different talk.
Are there other questions from
but
people?
The IPM that's a, those pest notes have everything under the sun. So that's a great website to go to.
And Connie just answered a question. Thank you, Connie. You can't really grow stuff on a north-facing balcony. You need 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. So find a window or a neighbor who gets better sun than you.
Community garden.
Okay. Are there other questions now? Oh, how sturdy are the newspaper pots? Do they last for weeks?
Well, yeah, I've had them last for weeks. You have to be a little careful once they're wet. If you're going to plant something like a tomato in it, it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks in it. I would use a double up the newspaper. But
what do you do about seeding?
Go ahead. Just don't, careful handling your paper.
What do you do with seedings that are leggy? I'm sorry, David.
That are what?
What do you do with seedings that are leggy?
Oh, or leggy? That's probably not enough light.
Yeah.
That's not the way with that. It could be too much fertilizer.
It says 16 hours of light.
You're doing 16 hours? 2 tubes?
Yeah.
I would, and you've got, get them as close as you can to your seedling, maybe an inch. Could be that you need to replace your fluorescent. But that's normally what that is. It's, even that much light is nothing compared to what you're going to get out of the yard. So sometimes it is hard to stop them from getting very late. You could go to the lights they use to grow marijuana, that would work.
Somebody's asking about bell peppers. They start from seed, but they never do that well after they're transplanted.
Bell peppers need a certain amount of sun. They don't do well in my garden. I plant them in my unheated greenhouse that gets nice and hot, and they don't do well. It still is not, enough sun. So what I would suggest is try growing non-bell peppers. If you like sweet peppers, you can grow ones that are not real, they're not fat like bell peppers. They're long and thin, banana peppers. And I have found that those do better in my yard, but I suspect that you're living in a climate where you don't have enough sun. Otherwise, it's in fertilizer. They do, of course, like a lot of fertilizer.
Somebody's asking if you can use empty toilet paper rolls to start seeds.
I think cardboard's just a little too, it's a little too thick. So I would not. I would go ahead with the paper.
Any more questions?
Lights are rather warm.
There are people who are asking questions that don't really pertain to this talk. And so they can check our website for future talks.
And we did mention the hotline. You know, they can call the hotline.
Right. So it sounds like we're at the end of the questions, unless.
Okay, thank you, David, for your presentation, and I want to thank everyone for coming.